Hello everyone, my name is Mary Irvin and I am a member of the education team at the International Testing Agency. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this month's webinar where myself and our two panellists will answer the questions submitted by you. So thank you for sending them in and thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world. And already I can see many of your messages coming in. So a big hello to you all from Colorado, Nepal, Malaysia, Spain, Uruguay, Italy, Brazil, and Peru. And I'm sure I have missed some, but it's a very warm welcome to you all. Now, before we get started, let me do a little bit of housekeeping. We are delivering this webinar in 5 languages. On your Zoom menu, you will see a button called Interpretation. By clicking on this icon, you can select a channel with your preferred language. I will be presenting this session in English, but you can also listen in Arabic, French, Russian, or Spanish. Today's webinar is part of our educational monthly series that are publicly available and designed to tackle key anti-doping topics and to raise clean sport awareness. As for all our sessions, it goes without saying that we encourage debate, interaction, and questions, but we do not tolerate any kind of aggressive behaviour or abusive or racist language. We trust you will all join us in the spirit of fairness, respect, and integrity. So as mentioned, some of you are already using the chat function. Please do continue to do that. We do also have the Q&A button as well. So please do feel free to pop a question in there at any part of the session, and we will address as many of these live as we can at the end. Finally, note we record all our webinars so that we can make them available on our website and YouTube channel for those who cannot join us live. Now, as always, it is my pleasure to give a shout out to our official presenting partner, Inform Sport. Their investment allows us to deliver the webinar programme free of charge in all these different languages. Inform Sport is a global certification programme for supplements that batch tests products for substances prohibited in sport. As supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage athletes and athlete support personnel to check all products before use at sport.wetestYouTrust.com. Also, the ITA is proud to be recognised by UNESCO as a leading international organisation for the delivery of anti-doping programmes. So, what is this webinar about today? Well, we asked you to submit questions to us for us to answer. Now, for full transparency, a few questions were submitted that were asking kind of the same thing. So to be efficient, we have merged some of them. And we've also reworded a few questions just for clarity. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists today and invite Anna and Florence to turn on their cameras, and let's offer them all a warm welcome. They are ITA ambassadors and Olympians. First up, I would like to introduce Anna Jelušić. Anna is a 3-time Olympic alpine skier who represented Croatia. At 15 years old, Anna was the youngest competitor at the Salt Lake City Winter Olympic Games in 2002. Anna is driven by a passion for sports, media and communications, and works closely with athletes as an International Olympic Committee career and master educator, supporting the smooth navigation of career transition for athletes. Welcome to today's webinar, Anna.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome.
Okay, we'll be hearing lots from you in just a moment. Next, I would like to introduce Florence Schelling. Florence is a 4-time Olympian in the sport of ice hockey, representing Switzerland, and winner of an Olympic bronze medal. Florence is passionate about athlete rights and is an advocate for safe and clean sport. She holds a master's degree of science in business administration, in strategy and management in international organizations, and is a certified professional coach. And a very warm welcome to today's webinar to you too, Florence.
Thank you very much, Mary. I look forward to spending the next hour with all of you.
Fabulous. So as well as the Q&A box, we also have the chat function I mentioned. We will also do a few poll questions throughout today's session as well. They will pop up on your screens. Your answers are anonymous, so please don't hesitate to participate. We'll also invite you to write some additional comments in the chat as well, so please do feel free to get involved in our conversation. So let's take a look at the first submitted questions. And of all the questions that came in, I'd like to start by asking you both this one. So although it isn't a specific anti-doping question, it does give an opportunity for both Anna and Florence to introduce themselves a little bit further in their own words. And the question on your screen there is, what does it take to become an Olympian? So maybe Anna, let's start with you.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you for kicking us off with the biggest question of all, potentially. What does it take to become an Olympian? To be completely honest, I have no idea. I've been there 3 times, and I think there are still days, 10, 15 years later, where I'm trying to let it sink in, because I think being an Olympian is so much more than competing at the Olympics, right? Not that that's an easy feat, right? It takes dedication and hard work and probably years of a lot of disappointment until you have that great opportunity. But I think for me, being an Olympian is about the values that you stand for, because you can be a great athlete and not be an Olympian in a way. And I think kind of having that level of understanding that it is your role to educate and help and portray your sport and the sporting environment as something positive, and hopefully inspire a new generation to pursue a healthier lifestyle and to pursue their passions. For me, I think that's at the core of being an Olympian.
Thanks, Anna. How about you, Florence?
Just adding on to what Anna has said, and I truly believe that this question is the million dollar question for sure. And I agree 100% with what Anna just said. But just going off of that too, I think what it takes is a lot of determination, a lot of drive, a lot of training and all of that. And especially in team sports, like it requires a lot of team spirit, because you can't do it as an individual. And I believe even in individual sports, you still have your entourage around you that makes up your team. And you need those people around you to become the best athlete, the best version of yourself, and ultimately then become an Olympian.
Thanks, Florence. It'll be interesting to hear how some of those themes that you've mentioned in the answer to this question might become apparent as we go through your clean sport journeys as well. So if we take a look at the next question straight away, all the rest of them now are very much focused on anti-doping. And the first one here, what was your first experience of anti-doping? Now, I know when we were chatting in the run-up to this call, both of you have reasonably similar experiences of your first experience with anti-doping. So Anna, perhaps you can tell us your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny that my first anti-doping experience is also one of my most memorable moments of my career. You would think that obviously there's successes, there's failures, but I think it's so vivid in my mind. I was, as you mentioned, 15 years old, and I had just qualified and competed at my very first Olympic as the youngest competitor in 2002 in Salt Lake. I crossed the finish line. I met with my coach, and all of a sudden there's almost this tap on my shoulder, and I'm sure it wasn't a tap, but there's a presence. It's like, you've been I'm here to notify you that you've been selected for a doping test. And I remember this fear in my body, kind of this irrational fear of, what did I do wrong? Because in my 15-year-old head, with absolutely no knowledge and understanding of any of the contexts of anti-doping, people who got tested, athletes who got tested, are athletes who have done something wrong. And I knew I hadn't done something wrong, but at the same time, you have this doubt. It's like, what happens next? And throughout this whole procedure of, trying to understand, do I leave my gear? Who do I give my skis to? Do I change my boots? Do I not? How far do I need to be from my doping control officer? Can someone come with me? What is the context of how the next hour, 2, 3, how long is this going to take? I knew nothing. And, in hindsight, I just wish that someone would have even given me the opportunity to understand that doping control at the big event is something that could happen independently on whether you win a medal or you just make it through the finish line, or sometimes even if you don't.
Thanks, Anna. Now, Florence, similar experience, but you were even younger, right?
My first experience with anti-doping was when I was 14 years old, participating at my first senior world championship in Halifax, Canada. And the way it works in ice hockey is that after the game, you get off the ice and you have the doping control officer standing right there and basically telling the players that have to go to doping control. And so I came off the ice, and then I was told that it's my time to go pee in a cup. And like Anna, I had no idea of the procedure. I had no idea about my rights and so on. So first thing, I was scared, because then ultimately I started thinking, what is it that I took into my body? Could I potentially be positive? Have I done everything right? So it's just like panic mode. And not knowing anything, not knowing the procedure, I just followed the doping control officer into the doping control office with my entire equipment on. I didn't know that I can go to the locker room, take my equipment off and all of that, and just having the doping control officer following me around. So I literally just sat in that doping control office with my entire equipment on, and it was awful because I didn't have to pee right away. So I was just sitting there waiting, and I had my team doctor with me, which was great, but he was new at the time too. So he didn't really know the whole procedure either. So it was just like the two of us there and going through the whole thing. And while the opponents, players that were selected for doping control, they walked in with just like their t-shirts and sweatshirts on, and they immediately went to pee, and then they were done within like a very short time, whereas I was literally sitting there. So it was just like, it was not a great experience. And obviously looking back at it, I wish I would have known about the procedure and my rights back then, and also the fact that somebody is watching you pee and all of that. It's just like very overwhelming, and I wasn't prepared for it at all.
So, we're kind of smiling at these anecdotes now, but there is something very serious in there as well. And I think both of your stories shows it's safe to say that your first experience of anti-doping was definitely not in education. And clearly that's something that we are striving for today, to make sure that every athlete does receive education before they are put in the situations that you both were. And I guess as well, Florence, that kit must be heavy and hot.
Absolutely. Like, I don't know what my equipment by itself weighs, but whenever I was traveling and I put my hockey bag onto the belt, it was around 20 kilos. So yes, you can't carry a whole lot of equipment with you, and it's definitely not handy when you have to first go into a stall and then take off your pants and stuff. Like, it's just not a good look and not a good experience to have to pee into a cup with your whole goalie equipment on.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point as well about the fact that, yes, you were a minor, you at least did have someone with you, but that person as well was new to anti-doping. And for me as well, this highlights the importance of the entourage and the people around the athlete also understanding the anti-doping system.
And Mary, I think if I can just tie
Please.
into Florence, and not to, I feel like, you know, as you said, we say the story with a smile, yet both of us remember it so vividly. And I don't want to say that you're traumatized by it, I think, but you're definitely kind of marked by your first anti-doping experience independently. And for everyone who might be listening here, it does get easier. It does get less awkward. I will never say, and I've been tested upwards of 30 times throughout my career, it never gets fun. It's not something that you're like, yay. I mean, unless sometimes if you're really good and you're getting tested because you're, you know, top 3, then do whatever you need. I'm happy to come along. But I think just knowing in advance what is going to happen. And I remember this moment where you're standing in the bathroom stall and, you know, you're waiting and you're trying to be like, okay, is this person going to turn around or make a couple of steps and stay away? But they're just like, oh no, roll your sleeves up to your elbows, pull your pants down to below your knees, and I'm going to stand here. And, you know, coming from sports, I don't really have a general issue with having someone seeing my body, but at the same time, kind of a heads up that this is how the process goes would have gone a long way.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And we're going to come back to doping control a little bit later on in the session, as we got a couple of very specific questions about this process there. We also had a question come in that we haven't put on the screen because essentially you've answered it during this this part of the webinar. And the question was, during adolescence, did you receive adequate clean sport education? So given the stories that we've just heard from both of you, we can say that absolutely it was the reverse, and that you were tested before education was even thought of.
It was
So
learning by doing in
yeah.
our cases.
So I guess keeping that in mind, I would like to ask our first poll question of the day. And that is for either those of you who are athletes and have this experience directly yourself, or those of you working with athletes or who are administrators, is what age did you first receive clean sport education? So 4 answers to choose from: under 13, 13 to 18, 19 to 25, and 25 plus. So I see the answers are coming in pretty quickly there. And a reasonable percentage of people having received some anti-doping education even under 13, but already 42% were 25 plus. So I'll let that play for another few seconds before we close it down. Okay, so it's staying fairly solid there, and that the early 40%, it's age 25 plus. So
I was well retired by that
yeah.
age, and I had 9 years of professional sport under my belt.
Yeah, so it's I'd like to throw this very question back to you, Anna and Florence, in terms of, you know, from your point of view, what age should you have received education, and what should that have looked like at different ages as well?
The clear answer to me is the moment, not the moment, a couple of months before you are actually eligible to be tested. I think going at it too early, yes, introducing some of the concepts of anti-doping, but I also am conscious that, you know, 8 or 10 or 12-year-olds might not have the maturity to understand everything and the dangers and the pitfalls of kind of anti-doping. So I think if you are mature enough to compete at an international or national level, at a high level, if your sport is more than a hobby, you know, in your hometown, that's the point where some of the key elements should slowly be brought up to you.
Thanks, Anna. And from your point of view, Florence?
Just adding to what Anna says, because I agree with her. I think it's especially important at the time when you probably least care about it. So that being said, in your teenage years, is probably the time when I wish I would have received that education. But obviously at that age, it's probably the time when you're like, I don't care about it, because you're not really in touch with it yet most of the time. But I think that's when it should be started.
Thanks. And I think from our point of view as well, if we think as educators too, it's about making it age appropriate as well. So yes, there may be some very young athletes who do need to know absolutely everything, but also the very young ones, like you mentioned, Anna, the sort of, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. There are ways of bringing in values and clean sport principles before you have to get too technical. So that the clean sport education is just always naturally part of an athlete pathway would be the ideal situation. Let's go straight into the next poll question, though. And this is about how you personally like to receive clean sport education. This time it's multiple choice. Choose as many different options as you like. Do you like e-learning, webinars, presentations, booths at an event, videos, social media channels, or is there something else that we've missed out here? If there is something else, please do let us know your thoughts in the chat. This is really interesting for us as we develop our education at the ITA to understand what type of activities would suit you best. So thanks for voting so quickly as well. I can see webinars are the most popular for this group. Maybe not surprising as you have actively chosen to join this webinar. So I think we should look at some of the other options as well. So again, almost a third of you liking e-learning. Not so many enjoying presentations or booths at an event. And thank you for a comment in the chat there about the dual approach of e-learning and presentations. So I've been able to do some things online yourself as well as in person. And I think that is really important. It's not just one size fits all. But considering this, then maybe I can come to you first, Florence. And this kind of ties in with our next question that we received as well, which was, in which way would you have liked to have been educated? And I know, Florence, you like booths, you like in person, you like to be able to touch and feel things. Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Absolutely. The way I would have liked to be educated is basically the approach that we have at the International Testing Agency with interactive presentations and booth activities where you really, as an athlete hands-on, get to like learn, for example, about the doping the doping process and like how you pour your cup with your pee into the collection vessels and so on. Just like, for me, when I hear somebody talking about stuff, I register it, but after a time, I forget about it. If I talk about it myself, then I learn already a bit more. But if I end up doing it myself and having that experience hands-on, then this is when I personally learn the most, and I enjoy it the most too, because it gives me an experience, and experiences is what sticks to you for a longer period of time.
And then maybe if we sort of stick with this theme, Florence, I mean, after you had that first experience of being tested, what did you then do something sort of proactively to try and learn more about anti-doping?
So what I did after my first experience was more into looking on how, for myself as an athlete, how can I make sure that I am a clean athlete and I will stay a clean athlete no matter what. So I started looking into how do I check my medication, and being from Switzerland, we have a very good system where we were able to check the medication, and I talked to my doctor multiple times and just like ensured that I'm safe from my side. So I'm an international level athlete now, and I understood that I'm responsible for what goes into my body. So I needed to make sure that I understand what goes into my body.
Thanks, Florence. And on your side, Anna, are there any methods that you particularly prefer from the list? And then also, did you do something similar to Florence in terms of having to be proactive?
I mean, unfortunately, and to an extent, I hate to admit that, but I think no matter which form the education might have come my way before that very first test, I'm wondering if it would have just flown over my head. So I do think that by doing and by kind of being in touch and being able to, in a way, go through the process and understand the gravity of making, the gravity of not thinking about it would have been important. I certainly would have loved to be opening the collection vessels without the fear of, contaminating them with my dirty hands. I don't know dirty from what, but I remember that's what was going through my head, and pouring some apple juice back and forth before you're actually doing, you spent an hour and a half trying to provide a sample, and you know that it needs to make it into the vessel and your hands are shaking because you're nervous. So all of those things of having at least the opportunity of do a test run would have been incredibly helpful in calming my nerves. And then I think in a way, just exposure. And I think that even, and I see it when we do events and we interact with athletes, you might not think that you're coming through to them, but I like to believe, and there's been instances where, months later, and Mary knows it, we will get an email. And it's like, oh, I'm in this situation. I didn't know where to turn, but I remember talking to you, and I have this contact. Can you help? And there's nothing that makes me prouder, because it means that even though maybe they didn't have the information itself, they had awareness. And I think for me, awareness would have gone a long way.
Yeah, and I think it as well, it gives you confidence as well, and just knowing that you then clearly developed that element of trust with someone as well, Anna, that they were able to remember you, sort of months later, and knew where to turn. And that could be a person, it could also be resources online as well. And towards the end of the webinar, we will leave you with some further reading, webinars and so on from some of these key topics that we have touched upon today. Okay, so we spent quite a bit of time on those first few questions, but I think they were super important, and they kind of like sort of harness everything that we're trying to do in clean sport education. So I think we should move directly to the next one. I was going to say they're all big ones. This is another big one as well, which is, how do you prevent youth athletes from doping? So Anna, maybe if I can come to you first on this one, thoughts here.
I mean, first of all, I think you can't dictate what someone does or doesn't do with their bodies. So I think prevention from doping, it's an incredibly ambitious task. But I think what you can do, and coming back in a way to this education, is you can make athletes aware of the risk of doping. And I do think that very often, and I myself included, I have always been true to myself. I've always been a clean athlete, and it's part of who you are. But that doesn't mean that you're immune to an anti-doping, to a rule violation. And I think that's where, when you think of, like, will you prevent someone who is proactively seeking to dope from doping through all of the means available to us? Probably not. But will you prevent an athlete to commit one of the offenses, or be exposed to something that or fail a test just because of pure lack of education, of knowledge, or carelessness, I absolutely think you do. And to Florence's point earlier, I think none of that was really real to me before my first test. Like anti-doping was not a theme in my life. And then all of a sudden, when you realize, you start thinking, what did I take? Do I know what I take? I had never questioned before my first anti-doping test the medication that my doctor or my physio or anyone had given me. I'm sick, here's a medication, thank you very much, take it for 10 days and I'll see you next time you need something. Whether I think that's the opportunity to anti-doping afterwards, you know, absolutely, I was asking, what is this? What is it for? Have you checked? Do I need to double check? I had the rule after that first anti-doping, I would never take a medication that didn't came in its original blister. I just wouldn't, and not because I was thinking someone's going to give me something, but in the end, the responsibility of what you take is with you. The responsibility of showing up for a doping test, to being true to your sport and your teammates and everyone is yours. And I think that's how we prevent doping, by just kind of increasing athlete responsibility, knowledge, and exposure to different layers of information.
Yeah. Florence, do you think similarly?
Very similarly, for sure. On top of that, I would say making the athlete understand the consequences of doing doping. That being said, every single athlete has a dream, has a goal that they want to achieve, has a passion for the sport that they're doing. And having that and making them understand that if they are not checking their medication, or they're going against the anti-doping rule violation and so on, that they could potentially lose the eligibility to go for that dream, to go for that goal that they have, so that they just can't do that anymore. Very harsh in a way, but at the same time, I feel like this is potentially how you can get to youth athletes of understanding the topic of doping and how it has to become important to them, even though there might not be affected by it, like Anna and me have been, with a tap on the shoulder and be like, you've been selected for doping control.
Yeah, it's not straightforward, and I guess this is also, you know, why this particular question was raised as well. As you've mentioned, there's understanding the consequences, there's knowing your rights and responsibilities, there's going out to, you know, try and take a performance enhancing drug versus, you know, not knowing the different things that you need to know in anti-doping, and then this I guess divide then with the inadvertent doping, but the consequences are then the same. So maybe we move on to the next one as well, because it kind of fits in with also the rights and responsibilities that we've been talking about there.
Mary,
And
sorry to be interrupting. I'm just reading through our Q&A, and I was wondering if we could just do a very quick tangent to a question that came from Gabriele about whether we have ever reported a teammate. And to me, this goes to this level of prevention. In my case, in my team, we were all very young. We were a very tight team. And I'm very proud to say that the culture that we were brought up in was, if in doubt, don't take it. So I have never been in a position where I've even been exposed to doping practices, or where there were even discussions about how to circumvent the rules. And that's probably a valid question. Would I have known what to do? But I do believe that just going back, not really to the knowledge, not to the understanding of the context, but going back to those very initial values of what you are as an Olympian, I 100% would have told someone and would have questioned it, into the nitty-gritty of what would have happened next. I'm very happy that today I believe it's much easier than it was when I was young to report it and to do so anonymously. And I'm still a strong believer that there is no room in sports, but there's no room in a team for an athlete who is doping, and not because of what they're doing to themselves, but also what they're doing to the credibility of that team.
Thanks, Anna. Yes, and happy to take that one as it came through there. Florence, maybe as well. I'll just say the question came through in Italian, but it was about reporting your teammates, and would you ever do it? Have you ever been in that position?
I have not been in that position throughout my entire career. I've never seen anybody with suspicious behavior or anything. So I do not have any experience with that.
Yeah, there are various mechanisms for reporting now. It can be either confidential, also anonymous. For example, the ITA's reporting platform is called Reveal. You can access it at reveal.sport. You can report in different languages as well. And you don't need to know everything about a situation to have to report either. Your small piece, might be the final piece that is needed in the jigsaw for further investigations to happen. So maybe we can put that in the chat as well, just the link to our website there. Okay, then let's take a look at the next question then, which was about education rights. And this one that was submitted is: receiving anti-doping information and education is an athlete's right. Why do we not see more athletes demanding it? So has this been your experience? Maybe I come to you, Florence, first of all, and what are your thoughts on this one?
This is a great question, and it's such an important question. The thing is, I actually think that athletes don't know better. When we talk about anti-doping, we mostly talk about the medication, the things that go into your body, and then the doping control itself. And with that, I would almost say that the circle is closed for athletes, and a lot of athletes actually don't know or don't understand the bigger picture of it, that there are multiple anti-doping rule violations, that you can fail a whereabouts information, and all of that. I just truly believe that athletes don't know that there's so much more to it, and based on that, they're not demanding it because they don't know that there's more to it.
Thanks, Florence. How about you, Anna?
I couldn't agree more. I think, to Florence's point, as an athlete, you think, well, I'm not trying to cheat. I'm not taking anything that is forbidden. I'm a clean athlete. That's it. Like, why would I care? Why would I need to know more? And I think it's probably shifting a little bit the narrative from, and we talked about it a few times, anti-doping is not, their ultimate goal is not to catch a cheater. So they're not out there trying to find who's done something wrong. Anti-doping's goal is to protect clean sport and to allow athletes to compete in a level playing field. And that does require a level of monitoring. And I think when you change the narrative and when you explain to athletes that education is not just because you're proactively going to do something to dope, but there's so many layers of things that could happen that could give you an advantage that you're in a way unaware of, or even not being responsible with your whereabouts, not providing a sample when you're requested to do so, engaging with someone who has a record of anti-doping rule violations, like all of those elements that you're completely unaware of and you don't think of them. When you ask an athlete, what is doping? Doping is taking prohibited substances. And most of the athletes will tell you doping is taking prohibited substances with the intention of gaining an advantage. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Thanks, Anna. And you've kind of led me into a little plug there for the July monthly webinar when you said what is doping there, and we're just working on that now. But we are going to go through the 11 anti-doping rule violations next month, because as you mentioned there, testing positive, it's by far the most common one, but it's often the only one that people think of. But there are 10 additional ones there that you mentioned there in terms of associating with someone who's banned and so on. So please do join us again if you can the last week of next month for that webinar. Okay, so I see we are getting some questions through for our live section a little bit later on, and we do have quite a few more to get through of the submitted ones. So let's move on to the next one, and we'll try and tackle these ones a little bit quicker. So next up here was the first of 2 doping control questions that came in. How do you perceive doping control officers? And DCOs for short, as a policeman or as a friend? And a follow-up there, do you have any advice for inexperienced DCOs? So Florence, let's go straight to you on this one.
My perception was always more of policemen than friend. They were always very strict, and yeah, like there wasn't much talking. They were strict, they were doing their job, and to me it wasn't like a space where I could ask questions. Thinking back to my first experience in my doping control, I feel like the doping control officer could have told me that I have rights, and the right would have been that I can go to my locker room and get changed, just stuff like that, telling me that. And then I feel like it has a lot to do with empathy too, understanding that the athlete might be in a situation where they're not the most comfortable in, and that's something that I will give as an advice to an inexperienced DCO, to really show empathy for the athlete and communicate with them. Tell them if they don't know something, create that space where the athlete feels comfortable to ask questions about something that they're not sure about.
And Anna, you had some mixed experiences as well, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like to describe those interactions as like the awkwardest dance you're ever going to have. It's 2 people that each have kind of specific roles, but those roles are not always in sync. So, I remember you're notified, and I have part of my brain that goes, oh, I still need to make it through the mix zone. I need to change. I need to debrief with my coach. There's like this list of things that are happening. And then you have the DCO who's next to you, who's like, I need to get this person, this athlete, to the anti-doping station. And very often, I feel like what used to miss is the piece of the puzzle where we take 30 seconds out of the chaos that is a post-event madness to say, hey, what time do you think you'll be able to report to the station? What are the steps that you would like to take? And you might say, oh, I don't know, I want to go and have a coffee with my mother. And they'll be like, well, so sorry, that's not a valid excuse, but you're more than welcome to finish your interviews in the mix zone. And I feel like there's kind of this balance of communication and saying, what is the expectation from both ends, what the next hour or 3 are going to look like? And then this person becomes no longer this awkward shadow that is just kind of following you through, but becomes part of the entourage that moves smoothly through the elements that need to happen for you to be able to, in the end, relax and take the time that requires to go through an anti-doping process.
Thanks, both of you. And I see a comment coming through in the chat as well about DCOs being empathetic as well. And that has come through in both of your answers. And I think in general as well now that, doping control officers are receiving, additional training, international certification, and in the case of when they are sent on missions by the International Testing Agency. And of course, that empathy, that professionalism, that communication is something key throughout this process. Okay, the next question coming up is also related to doping control. We will have to take these fairly quickly, but that is, have you ever had an experience where you were not sure if the person conducting the out of competition test was legitimate? So Florence, over to you first.
I have not had such an experience, so I'm going to keep it short.
Anna, how about you?
No, same here. I think it's just worth noting that you could be tested by so many different entities that when in doubt, just pee in the cup.
Thank you. Maybe I'll then just sort of touch on this as well, and echoing what you just said there, Anna. You know, in terms of understanding your role, your rights, and your responsibilities there. You know, as an athlete, you can always ask to see the DCOs identification. Many do have photo ID with expiry dates on them. If not, you should ask to see their official ID. And you can also ask for the letter of authority from the anti-doping organization that has sent them. And also bear in mind that it could be the National Anti-Doping Organization, it could be the International Federation, or it could be a third party like the International Testing Agency. But main advice is ask those questions, but best to take the test. So let's do one very quick poll question. I'm going to put this up. I might give away the answers as we are running out of time here, but I put this up really to sort of showcase what the athlete rights are during the doping control process. So some of you may want to select some answers if you like. It is multiple choice. But really, the point of this slide is to show that these are the different things that you can do as an athlete. So you can have a representative, you can request an interpreter, you can ask for identification, you can ask any questions at any time. You can request a delay for a valid reason. It's then up to the doping control officer to say yes or no to it. And you can request special assistance or modifications should you need them. Okay, so the next two questions that were submitted are about supplements. And I see as well that we have received some questions about supplements in the Q&A box as well. Supplements is one of our most requested topics. And this question that we received is, as elite athletes, did your national federation or national anti-doping organization have an approved list of safe companies who manufacture supplements? So again, I think we can answer this one fairly quickly. How about you, Florence?
So I've never actually taken supplements during my playing career just because I was too scared of them not being clean. So I never really looked into it too much, but I do believe that we had such a list in Switzerland with a couple of companies that we were able to take supplements from, but I'm not 100% positive.
Thanks, Florence. And Anna, you have a slightly different experience, and maybe as well we can tie this in with the next question that we received. So if we also look at the next slide at the same time, which was, is it best to avoid supplements and use a food-only approach? But first up, Anna, what was your experience in this area?
I mean, you know, unfortunately, there wasn't an entity like Informed Sport at the time that offered at least a first safety level of batch testing products. Obviously, food first is always the best choice. Unfortunately, in my case, I come from a sport where I spent 200 plus days in various hotels, you know, sometimes not great hotels around the world. And the food only approach sometimes then fails you. So I definitely have taken supplements throughout my career, but I think I have never taken them by just buying them at a corner store or the local gym. I have always made sure that we had a nutritionist that was part of the National Olympic Committee who, you know, did some of the background research, made sure that the supplements were from reputable sources. And to be fair, I only ever took the minimum necessary. I stayed away from anything that was, you know, going to give you superpowers, high intensity something. So stick to the basics would be my kind of take on it. And luckily enough, I've never failed a doping test. So I think that speaks to the food first and triple check everything approach.
Thanks, both of you. And I'll maybe then tie this in with the question that we did receive from Robin, which was how to be sure with dietary supplements. So I'm happy to talk to that one as well. So overall, we can never say that any supplement is 100% risk-free. It is one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, but there are different ways of reducing that risk. And we would always recommend taking a very individual approach to supplements to allow you to make an informed decision. So, for example, you know, doing a risk-benefit analysis, what might be suitable for a teammate might not be the best solution for you. You know, so seek professional advice if you can as well. If not, there are tools out there that can help. And if you do choose to take a supplement, take one that has been batch tested. Take a photo of that batch number, keep a small amount as well. And in just a couple of moments, we will have a look at a slide that has resources and links on it. And you will all be sent these at the end of the webinar as well. So you'll simply be able to click on the links. But as I mentioned, supplements is one of the biggest topics that we receive questions and are asked for advice on. And we have done several webinars completely dedicated to this issue, and we've had expert panelists and athletes coming on to talk about their experiences. So would be great if you wanted to learn more. You can watch those additional webinars. Okay, so I think we are on to our final submitted question now. So maybe we can take a look at that one. And that is, what was the best advice you received and from whom for staying true to yourself and exploring your true values? Now, I will come to Florence first on this one, but also inviting the audience here to share any pieces of advice that they have received in the chat, should they wish to. So Florence, how about you?
I don't have an experience of or I can't recall any specific advice that I was given, but I did have my goalie partner who was many years older than me. That was kind of my mentor throughout, especially my young years in the national team. And she kind of helped me guide through the whole process of becoming an international level athlete and what it takes and all of that. And I believe thanks to her and the work that she did with me, I became the athlete that I was until I retired, and the person that I am today. So having that a person around you that you know you can trust them no matter what, go up to them for advice and whatnot, that to me was so valuable.
Thanks, Florence. Did you have someone similar, Anna?
Probably, you know, I come from an individual sport where you don't necessarily have that mirror to look into, but if I were to point out, I definitely had a physio in the early days, and I think, I don't know if this was ever, you know, a sit down and let me give you some advice from the future type of thing, but his take on our whole career was that you're gonna have successes, you're gonna have failures, but in the end, the only thing that's gonna remain out of your whole career is your reputation. And to an extent, I think that's really true. And that goes, you know, it goes to obviously, you know, the basics of don't dope, but be true to yourself, be kind, play fair, play by the rules, try to set an example. And I do still very often remind myself of that I myself forget about results, right? I'm an Olympian. I went to 3 games. It takes me a second to even remember the results of those games and other competitions. But what will forever be in my memory is how the sport built me into who I am today and the reputation that it allowed me to maintain. And that would have crumbled with a positive test. So, they say measure twice, cut once. With medications, you do the same. You check twice, and then you only take them once if absolutely necessary.
Thank you, both of you, for those powerful words. We're going to switch straight to those resources that I talked about now, and then we can tackle a couple of final questions that have been submitted in the Q&A there. So those are links to some of those webinars that I was talking about, particular around the doping control process and also supplements. We've also put on there some links to information for athletes from the ITA's Athlete Hub webpage, and also to WADA's Adele platform. That's an e-learning platform. I remember from the poll that quite a lot of you enjoyed learning this way. They have many different courses available for different levels of athletes, as well as coaches and medical personnel. And many of those courses are available in different languages as well. Okay, so with our couple of minutes left, let's switch then to the live Q&A. And a colleague of mine has very helpfully translated the first question, which is a Spanish one, as I do not speak Spanish. So for everybody's benefit, the question submitted is, what about athletes with disabilities who take medication because of their disability? Is this considered doping? Well, Anna, I might come to you in a minute, just to talk about therapeutic use exemptions, as I know you've had experience there. But here I would say, so there is one prohibited list. So the rules are the same for everyone in terms of the medications and substances that are and are not allowed to be taken. Of course, there are instances where, for health reasons, you might need to take a substance that is prohibited in sport. But then there's a very clear way of getting pre-authorization to take that medication. Anna, would you mind elaborating from your experience there?
No, absolutely. I'm happy to share. I was diagnosed with asthma a couple of, I think, months after my first Olympics. And obviously, I was prescribed a bronchodilator. Sorry, I still don't know how to pronounce it, which is prohibited in my sport. And I had to go through a relatively extensive testing process every year. I think that's quite important to note, that it's not something you apply for once and then you can continue to take it, because it needs to serve the purpose. So every year I would get checked by my doctors, apply for a TUE. And maybe this might be interesting for someone. I've had it approved for a couple of years, and then the rules changed and became more strict. And then it was rejected 4 or 5 years into using the same medicine. And we had to go back and actually prove with additional tests that it was really necessary for my health to take the medication. Eventually was approved, but it is an awkward moment in time where you're like, I can't take it because I need to get approval. And not to scare everyone, I mean, obviously, if it's a life or death situation, then sport comes second. But in the everyday life, you absolutely can take medication. There's a process to it.
Thanks, Anna. And the Athlete Hub link that I mentioned there has full information on the therapeutic use exemption process. I would like to take one more just very quickly, and that is prevention should happen during elementary school, regardless of whether you are an athlete or not. Do you agree? So I guess we can link this back to what type of education you should receive at what age that we alluded to earlier. So maybe Florence, some final words from you on that one.
if you have a schooling system that would allow that, absolutely. Having that, the earlier the better. The more you hear it, the more it will stick to the people, whether they are athletes or not. It is absolutely essential. Unfortunately, a lot of schooling systems don't allow such a thing. So I could see that being very, very difficult in the implementation of it. But absolutely, I agree. If it can be done in elementary school, go for it.
And Anna?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't think necessarily, even if it's not called anti-doping, but as part of your health and education, when you're telling children, hopefully there is someone telling children not to do drugs, it might be a valuable kind of parenthesis to make, that drugs are not just the heavy drugs and the drugs as perceived, but there are contexts in which anything can be a drug.
Thanks both, and I'm afraid that wraps up today's webinar. So just leaves me time to say a big thank you to both of you as our panelists, and to the audience for all their interaction and their pre-submitted questions and their live ones as well. We are going to pop our email address up on screens for you in just a moment. So if you have any questions later on, or if we didn't get round to addressing your question today, then you can please drop us a line and we will be happy to help. As I mentioned earlier as well, next month's webinar will be focused on anti-doping rule violations. It will be held on the 26th of July, same time, 2 p.m. CET, and registrations will open a couple of weeks prior to this. And finally, if you would like to receive updates from the ITA in general, please sign up using this link that appears on your screens now, and it will also be in the PDF that we'll send to you very soon. Thank you all once again, and I wish you all a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.